Welcome to Silent Revenge, where what feels like love and family can sometimes hide the cruelest betrayals. That Christmas morning, I thought I knew my family. I thought I understood loyalty. But what unfolded shattered everything. My daughter, the little girl I raised, walked into our living room with a smile that froze my heart. She handed her mother-in-law the keys to an 85,000 Tesla, and me a 25 gift card to a coffee shop, a laughable token if it weren't so cutting. I stared at the shiny envelope in my hand, the weight of humiliation pressing down like a lead blanket. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had I done something wrong? Was I being paranoid? But the look in my daughter's eyes, cold, almost rehearsed, told me this wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. The same daughter who had once begged me to bake cookies with her, to read stories, to just be there, had transformed into someone I barely recognized. "Mom, I thought you'd like it," she said softly, her tone too casual, too precise. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And it stung worse than any argument I'd ever had. The Tesla gleamed under the Christmas lights, a monument to favoritism. I could feel my husband's awkward glance, trying and failing to apologize without words. Our home, once warm with laughter, felt icy and alien. I realized then that the heartache wasn't just about a gift. It was about betrayal, about being discarded in favor of someone else, and worse, of being humiliated in front of the one person you raised. I remember sitting in the corner, watching them laugh, feeling the walls close in. How could a mother's love be repaid with such disdain? And yet, deep down, I knew that this wasn't the end. I felt something stirring inside me, an awareness that life, cruel as it might be, also offered opportunities. But I wasn't ready to act, not yet. First, I needed clarity, strategy, and patience. The quiet hum of resentment grew into a dark pulse in my chest, a reminder that sometimes revenge isn't just justified, it's inevitable. And as I sipped the bitter coffee bought with that tiny gift card, I realized one thing: appearances deceive, and loyalty can be a dangerous illusion. What seemed like love was a mask. And underneath it, something far more calculating was at work. The moment the wrapping paper settled in the trash can, the weight of reality hit me like a hammer. I watched my daughter and her mother-in-law whisper behind their hands, their laughter ringing like nails being driven into my chest. I felt invisible, discarded. All the years of sacrifice, the nights spent soothing scraped knees, the endless patience, they didn't matter anymore. I was just there, a placeholder. It wasn't the price of the gifts that burned me, it was the message. The Tesla screamed extravagance, wealth, and favoritism, all pointed squarely at her mother-in-law. And my 25 gift card, it wasn't even insulting for its value. It was insulting for what it represented: disregard, indifference. The final confirmation that I had been sidelined in the very family I had nurtured. I tried to speak. It's okay, sweetie." I stammered, my voice shaking, but it was hollow even to me. They smiled, their eyes sharp, almost triumphant. That's when I noticed the other subtle signs, her glances, the careful positioning of the gifts, the way her mother-in-law lingered near the Tesla, as if testing its shine. Everything was deliberate. Everything was a performance. After they left for brunch with the extended family, I stayed behind, staring at the coffee shop gift card like it contained the answers to some cruel riddle. My mind spiraled. Had I done something to deserve this? Had I missed some conversation, some slight, some secret resentment that grew into this open humiliation? And then it hit me. The betrayal wasn't just in the gifts. It was in the planning. They had orchestrated this, timed it perfectly, ensured I would feel the sting. I felt the first real pulse of anger, cold and sharp. Not the kind that leads to shouting or tantrums, but the kind that burrows under your skin, whispers, and sharpens your mind. Betrayal from family is a knife you never see coming. And now it was lodged deep. I walked to the window, watching the Tesla gleam under the winter sun, a symbol, a testament. And I realized that understanding the why was the first step. If I wanted justice, if I wanted revenge that would cut as deeply as this humiliation, I needed more than emotion. I needed insight. I needed patience. The quiet, empty house felt suffocating, yet strangely empowering. This wasn't just a slight, it was a signal, and I was ready to read it, piece by piece. Every whisper, every glance, every calculated smile would become my blueprint. The days that followed were unbearable. Every time I passed that gleaming Tesla in the driveway, my stomach churned. My daughter's laughter echoed in my mind, mixing with the faint, mocking tones of her mother-in-law. I tried to bury the anger, tried to tell myself it was just a holiday misunderstanding, but every rationalization crumbled under the weight of reality. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I found myself replaying every interaction, every family gathering, every smile that had seemed too perfect. Had I missed something? Did I ignore the signs that my daughter was changing, drifting, turning against me? The thought alone made my chest tighten. I felt a dangerous mix of sorrow and rage, a cocktail that left me restless and sleepless. Nights were the worst. When the house was quiet, my mind would spiral, imagining conversations, whispered plans, and secret alliances I hadn't been aware of. "I can't believe she did this to me," I whispered into my pillow one night, the words catching in my throat. I hated that I felt this way. I hated that my own daughter could wield rejection like a weapon. But the humiliation was real, and it burned hotter with every passing day. The gift card wasn't just a token, it was a declaration I was no longer valued, no longer important, no longer worthy of care or respect. I thought about confronting them, about letting my emotions explode in front of them, about demanding an explanation. But a voice inside me whispered caution. Rage uncontrolled would make me weak. It would feed them the satisfaction they were clearly seeking. I had to endure, to mask, to act as if nothing had happened, all while the fire inside me smoldered, growing stronger, sharper. I started noticing details I had never paid attention to before, the way my daughter answered the phone, the subtle pauses when her mother-in-law spoke, the careful curation of social media posts. Everything was a signal. Everything was a reminder of my exclusion. The humiliation had morphed into obsession, and obsession into strategy. By the end of the week, I realized that this emotional struggle, this constant tension, this quiet, simmering fury, was the first stage of empowerment. Pain, I understood now, could be honed. It could sharpen your mind, focus your thoughts, and awaken a cunning you didn't know you possessed. After a week of sleepless nights, and replaying that Christmas morning over and over in my mind, I knew that reacting impulsively would ruin everything. Rage alone could not be my weapon. It would only make me predictable. What I needed was strategy. Silent, calculated, methodical. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about precision. I started by observing, noting patterns and routines. My daughter had become a master of subtle manipulation, her smiles carefully timed, her words measured, her gestures rehearsed to perfection. Her mother-in-law, equally calculating, fed off my discomfort, relishing the spectacle. I realized that to regain control, I had to understand not just their actions, but their motives. Every small detail mattered, the way the Tesla's keys were delivered, the timing of conversations, even the social media posts boasting about gifts. I pulled out a notebook and began a meticulous record. Times, dates, comments, body language. The smallest inconsistencies were clues, the tiniest hints gold. I started analyzing past family interactions, trying to trace the seeds of resentment that had grown into this public humiliation. Every memory became a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle I intended to solve. But planning wasn't just observation. I had to anticipate their next moves, predict their assumptions about me. They believed I was hurt, passive, and powerless. They believed I would fold, accept my place, and remain silent. That assumption was my advantage. I would appear compliant, even weak, while I built a quiet foundation beneath them, one that would support my eventual response. Financial matters were next. The Tesla, extravagant gifts, and public display of favoritism weren't just about emotion, they were about power. If I wanted to strike effectively, I needed leverage. I began reviewing legal documents, property arrangements, and family assets. I researched quietly, meticulously, ensuring I would have knowledge where they assumed ignorance. Every piece of overlooked information could become a weapon in the right moment. Finally, I honed my mindset. Patience became my ally. Humiliation had fueled anger, now it fueled clarity. I visualized outcomes, weighing risks and consequences. Each scenario sharpened my understanding. The goal wasn't simply to retaliate, but to reclaim dignity, to expose hypocrisy, and to ensure the lesson they delivered so cruelly would circle back, quietly but unmistakably. I waited for the perfect moment. Patience had sharpened my senses, and I could feel when the atmosphere was right. The house was quiet, a rare stillness before the storm. I began my first moves carefully, almost invisibly, like a shadow moving through familiar rooms. Every action was measured, every word unremarkable. I couldn't let them suspect that I had transformed my humiliation into a quiet, calculated plan. It started with small financial adjustments. I quietly reviewed shared accounts and discovered subtle patterns of overspending and overlooked transfers that hinted at carelessness. Nothing illegal, but enough to shift control subtly in my favor. I moved money into accounts they assumed I wouldn't touch, set reminders for legal documents they had neglected to update, and ensured that every small action would ripple outward without revealing my hand. The thrill of control, even in small ways, was intoxicating. Next, I began social maneuvering. Family gatherings, casual conversations, phone calls. I became a master of passive observation. Every comment, every laugh, every glance became data. I listened more than I spoke, smiled more than I argued. They assumed I was still the passive, humiliated figure from Christmas morning. And that assumption, that perception of weakness, was my armor. My daughter continued her casual boasts, the Tesla shining in every conversation. But now each word fed my strategy. I also planted subtle seeds of doubt. A question here, a reminder there, casually dropped observations about past incidents they had overlooked or misrepresented. Their faces betrayed nothing at first, but I could feel the micro-reactions, the flicker of unease, the slight hesitation in their smiles. It wasn't overt confrontation, yet it was enough to crack their perfect veneer, just slightly. By the end of the week, I had shifted small pieces without them realizing it. Their perception of control remained intact, but the groundwork for the larger plan had been laid. Every account, every document, every subtle suggestion moved me closer to the point where their arrogance and assumptions could be turned against them. By the third week after that Christmas morning, the quiet tension in the house had become palpable. My daughter and her mother-in-law still smiled at me, but now their smiles faltered ever so slightly when I entered the room. I could see it, the subtle unease, the micro shifts in body language, the way they hesitated over words. My small moves had begun to ripple outward, and now it was time to push further. I started planning stories carefully, casual mentions of minor financial oversights, questions about legal documents, subtle reminders of promises they had broken in the past. To the outside observer, I appeared calm, even meek, but every word was designed to unsettle. My daughter laughed nervously at one comment about budgeting, her mother-in-law frowning at another subtle observation about her Tesla. Related tax deductions. The cracks were appearing, and I could feel the power shifting inch by inch. At the same time, I escalated my presence in family decisions. Where I had been sidelined before, I began inserting myself with soft, persuasive authority. I asked questions, offered insights, and suggested alternatives that seemed innocuous, but forced them to consider perspectives they had previously ignored. They started listening, if only reluctantly, and I could see the frustration building behind their forced politeness. The psychological game deepened when I orchestrated small, controlled mistakes on their part. A misfiled document, a missed appointment, these were tiny, almost accidental, seeming errors I had predicted would happen. When they stumbled, I remained calm, quietly pointing out the issues with a measured tone. Their confidence began to falter. The same arrogance that had allowed them to humiliate me now became the very leverage I needed. Yet the most satisfying escalation wasn't public humiliation. It was private. In quiet moments, I dropped hints about knowledge they assumed I didn't possess. Every whispered concern, every pointed question, made them reconsider what they thought they knew about me. Their smiles, once so sharp and triumphant, now twitched with uncertainty. I could almost see the fear beneath the surface, the realization that the mother they thought powerless might not be so powerless after all. It happened sooner than I expected. A careless comment from my daughter, meant to flaunt her control over family finances, opened the door I had been waiting for. Her mother-in-law laughed at the remark, oblivious to the small, calculated web I had woven behind the scenes. But I noticed everything. Every word, every glance, every tiny slip became fuel for the next step. The humiliation they had delivered to me was about to circle back, subtly but unmistakably. I approached the situation with surgical precision. First, I quietly ensured that their financial mistakes would be noticed by the right people. Subtle alerts, timely questions, and strategically shared documents made their carelessness visible, not through confrontation, but through undeniable facts. They couldn't deny the errors. They couldn't dismiss the implications. The Tesla, the lavish gifts, all of it suddenly became part of a chain of oversights they had assumed I would never notice. Next, I leveraged social perception. Friends, relatives, even casual acquaintances were gently informed of discrepancies, all framed as innocent concern. The effect was immediate: hushed questions, awkward silences, and a shift in the family dynamic. Suddenly, the mother-in-law's superiority felt fragile, her carefully curated image trembling under subtle scrutiny. My daughter, too, began to sense the imbalance. She tried to cover, to charm, to redirect attention, but I had anticipated every move. What was most satisfying wasn't revenge for revenge's sake, it was the reclamation of dignity. I had been humiliated, cast aside, made to feel insignificant. Now, the power dynamic was reversing. Every glance, every question from family and friends served as a reminder. The mother they had dismissed as weak was neither weak nor passive. I had outmaneuvered them without raising my voice, without melodrama, through strategy, patience, and observation. And yet, the fallout carried lessons heavier than satisfaction. I realized how fragile relationships can be when built on favoritism, arrogance, or disregard. How quickly trust can shatter, leaving scars deeper than anyone can see. I understood that revenge is not about cruelty, it is about restoring balance and ensuring lessons are learned without losing yourself in the process. The final confrontation didn't need shouting, tears, or dramatic scenes. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, but its impact was undeniable. One evening, I called a family meeting under the guise of holiday planning. My daughter and her mother-in-law entered, smiles carefully painted, still convinced I was the same passive figure they had humiliated. I let them settle before speaking, calm, controlled, and precise. "I've reviewed some of our accounts and documents," I said softly, placing the neatly organized files on the table. Their eyes flickered with unease, the first subtle crack in their armor. I went through the numbers carefully, pointing out discrepancies they had overlooked, mismanagement, and moments where arrogance had blinded them. Each fact was undeniable, each omission a mirror of the very oversight they had assumed I couldn't see. I watched my daughter's face pale as she realized the depth of my knowledge. Her mother-in-law shifted in her chair, eyes darting, searching for excuses that weren't there. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I simply presented the truth in its full clarity. The Tesla, the extravagant gestures, the carefully orchestrated humiliation, they all suddenly seemed petty in the face of the consequences they had ignored. By the end of the evening, the tension was tangible. The power dynamic had shifted completely. They could no longer feign control, charm, or superiority. And in that quiet, precise unmasking, I reclaimed what they had tried to take from me: respect, dignity, and the knowledge that underestimation has a cost. I realized then that revenge isn't about destruction, it's about balance. It's about ensuring that those who sought to wound you are made aware of the truth of their actions, without compromising who you are. I had been humiliated, cast aside, and dismissed. But through patience, observation, and strategy, I had restored equilibrium in a way that no shouting, no confrontation could have achieved. That Christmas, the gifts didn't matter anymore. The Tesla glittered in the driveway, but the true victory lay in the quiet reckoning. They had learned, subtly, sharply, and permanently, that appearances deceive, and that underestimating someone who has been wronged is a mistake you only make once. Mini cliffhanger, and though the house seemed calm now, I knew one truth: awareness and vigilance are lifelong defenses. Betrayal may never vanish, but the ability to respond wisely is a gift that lasts. Reflection. True revenge isn't loud, it's precise, intelligent, and restorative. Humiliation can be countered without losing your integrity. Balance can always be restored. YouTube closing CTA. If this story resonated with you, hit like. I know the emotions were raw. Comment below with your thoughts, or if you've ever faced betrayal that shook your world. And subscribe to Silent Revenge for more stories where justice isn't about anger, but strategy, patience, and reclaiming what's rightfully yours.